Hi, my name is Himanshu and welcome to What It Takes. You know what? Today is the day of how to set up a consulting firm. But I'm so damn thrilled to invite someone, a personality like that, who is not an example, not only an example of, starting something of his own, but as a huge influence to a lot of people across India who wants to do something of their own, right? He's a firm believer of self-employment and a great influencer. So let me take a minute and help me introduce him. So Dr. Pawan Soni is an innovation evangelist by profession and a teacher by passion. He's a founder of Inflection Point, offering programs on design thinking, strategic acumen, and consulting skills. And apart from being an adjunct faculty at ISB Hyderabad and IIM Bangalore, Pawan has engaged with companies including Reliance, Tata's, ITC, Flipkart, and Novartis. So Pawan is a mentor for NSR Cell at IIM Bangalore and the founder institute and a columnist at HT Mint, Your Story, and People Matters. He has been invited to speak at ISRO as a part of their distinguished lecture series and has delivered talks over 120 organizations in India and abroad. Right? And Pawan is the only Indian to be shortlisted for the prestigious FP and McKinsey Brackenbower Award for the Best Business Book of the Year 2016. He has also been invited 5 times to speak at TEDx. And for his work and innovation, Pawan has bagged the prestigious On the Job Achiever Award at Lakshya at 2007 at NITI Mumbai. You know what? He I can talk and talk, but a personality like that is definitely worth listening, right? And with that, let me invite Dr. Pawan on What It Takes. Hi, Dr. Pawan.
Hi.
So, Dr. Pawan, so we are looking forward to gain as much as experience from you to help people who wants to start or their consulting firms, right? And so, why don't we start with your background first? Why don't you share your background, Dr. Pawan?
Okay. So I grew up in a place called Rawatbhata, which is in Rajasthan. I did my schooling till 12th there. We had a central board as a part of Atomic Energy Central School. So we had a very pristine environment and a very controlled place, which I cherished tremendously. Thereafter, I went for my engineering at Jodhpur, electronics and communication. So I did some studies there. And from there, I went on to Mumbai to do my MBA from NITI Mumbai, 2 years. And in 2005, January is when I came to Bangalore. Ever since I have been in the city of Bangalore. My campus placement was in Wipro. And there I spent close to about 6 years. It was a very thrilling time. And that's where I got introduced to the whole realm of innovation management. I was an innovation evangelist at Wipro. Used to conduct programs on innovation and creativity with internal employees, few of Wipro's customers. But over the weekends is when I used to flex my muscles in terms of teaching. So I took up teaching, and I was so passionate about teaching and consulting that I thought, why not do a PhD in the space of innovation management, which took me to IIM Bangalore in the year 2011 to pursue my fellowship program in strategy with a focus in innovation culture. Halfway down the PhD program is when I thought that it might not be justified for me to just be limiting myself to be a teacher. So why not straddle between teaching and consulting? And that's when I founded my company Inflection Point. So that's been the journey so far.
Fantastic. So, help us with what your consulting company does and what is their long.
Yeah. So there are 3 domains where I focus on. The first is on design thinking. So my company focuses on coaching people on how to use design thinking to solve complex problems. We do mentoring programs with leaders and senior managers on how to implement design thinking ethos within their organization. That one track is on design thinking. The second is on innovation culture, which stems directly from my PhD research work. And that's an area of huge interest and research liking for me, where we talk to the leadership team through webinars, seminars, lectures, hand-holding, case study sharing, a bit of writing also. And how do they form a culture of innovation? and which is a long held dream for me, that we can produce world-class innovative companies from India, because our current understanding of innovation is highly influenced by the Western philosophy and the Western literature. And I think it's about the time that we have enough and more companies coming from India. And the third dimension is on strategic acumen. So because in my PhD program, I was introduced to the domain of strategy quite extensively. So I used that to shape the people's strategic thinking. So 3 areas of focus is design thinking, innovation culture, and strategic acumen.
Fantastic. So, I mean, it takes usually, you have a background of employment, right? You have a background about so many people who have been in background of consulting, teaching, things like that, right? But if I am a person who is looking forward to start something in consulting, right? So, according to your experience, how long did it take for you from an idea, from the seed of idea, till the company was fully functional? So, how long and how was the journey?
It's a good question. So, if I reflect on my journey, there are a couple of insights which I would like to share to the audience today. The first big myth that we hear about innovation, or about rather entrepreneurship or venturing out on your own, is that you need to take a tremendous amount of risk. I don't believe that entrepreneurship calls for taking risk as much as it calls for being disciplined. Because we are often not willing to be disciplined, and that is where people often resort to employment, because they would need somebody external to discipline them. It can be a form of supervisor, colleagues, the work environment, the office timings, etc. But if you're disciplined, then you are actually not taking a tremendous amount of risk. While people outside may view you to be taking risk, betting a lot, but within you, you are pretty clear what you are doing. Now, what really helped me is, it was not really a transition from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. It was a very smooth graduation. And as I'd alluded to before also, when I was working with Wipro, I used to spend most of my weekends teaching. And that's where I developed this competence and a bit of credibility as a teacher. And to supplement that, because I wanted to be a consultant. And when you want to be a consultant, there are 2 things that you need. One is experience, and second is expertise. And often experience and expertise can be mutually traded. So the only way people would listen to me is either if I have a lot of gray hairs and I season myself in the space, then I'll have some sort of a voice that people might listen to me. Right. And to overcome that hazard, I might also develop expertise. And that's where I did my PhD. So PhD almost gave me an advantage of about 10 to 15 years. What I'm able to do today, I would not have possibly been able to do for another 10 years. So that is a kind of crashing that it allowed me to do. And also important thing is that, how do I hedge my risk? Because I know that since I have done my PhD from a premier institute, I've always covered myself. That the worst case scenario, I will go back to the job market if things don't work out, or I'll always go back to a university and be a teacher. And I never cut my umbilical cord with teaching. So even in thick of my consulting practice, once in a month, I'll always go to an IIM Bangalore or an IIM Lucknow or an ISB or some other institute like Trichy, etc. and teach. Teaching may not be highly rewarding in terms of money. It is in some cases, of course, but teaching is very important for you to remain grounded. Because if you cannot simplify things and tell it to people who are 21, 22 years of age, who are irreverent to you, then you might err on the risk of being too superficial. Because the corporate clients do not catch you. They still have a latitude and a leeway that allows you to do some amount of global gyan. But these school students are very sharp. Right. Especially in the IIM scheme of things, they're very sharp. They'll nip you if you are slightly astray. So by having this combination of being able to teach, being able to remain connected with the industry, and being able to write. So this ecosystem that you develop really helps you hedge your risk. And hence entrepreneurship is not so much about risk taking. To outsider, it might look like you have really kicked the bucket, well-paying job, you had a place where you could have taught, etc., but not so much to the individual. If you have planned it well, then I think it's very doable and must be done, in my opinion.
Nice. In fact, whenever I talk to someone who really wants to start something of their own, the first thing they say, it's huge risk for us. The first dialogue, right? Because I don't know what the mindset is more towards money. The mindset is most towards their time and the insecurity that they feel within the job itself, right? And thanks for covering that so well. So basically, what you feel is, if taking at least I should have some backup that I can fall onto, and then obviously I can focus much positively towards doing something of my own.
Absolutely. And that is something that has to be developed gradually. It will never happen instantly. For example, when entrepreneurs reach out to me for seeking advice on their enterprises, one of the things which I always ask them is, why you? Why are you most suitable to tap this opportunity? Because opportunities are galore. Once the lockdown gets lifted, there are so many opportunities all around us. But why you? Why are you well positioned than anybody else to be able to tap this opportunity? Which means that the starting point is typically not the opportunities outside. The starting point is typically the capabilities deep within. And these capabilities have to be developed painstakingly and in a very thoughtful manner. So I think the most successful entrepreneurs have ensured that they have developed a competence which is quite unique and protected, and it's not eroded with time. And the second thing is, and something which I'm also picking up, is that entrepreneurship is not a step function. It's a graduation.
Right.
It means that it's not that one fine day you don the hat of an entrepreneur. Until about that time, you were an employee. Even when you were an employee, you had the entrepreneurial traits, which means that you have this ability of going out, doing things on your own, seeking forgiveness and seeking permission, venturing out beyond the call of your duty, not sticking to your goals and objectives, developing a network or an ecosystem that really harbored your ideas. And it's just a matter of title shift. For example, I remember in my Wipro days, Wipro has been, on papers, Wipro has been the biggest provider of entrepreneurs in the country.
Wow.
Yeah. If you look at the total number of entrepreneurs who are out there, the company where they have spent their time at is Wipro. And I did spend a good amount of time there. And what I can second most of them is the fact that Wipro allows you to have that amount of operational freedom, but at the same time, financial discipline. Because you have too much of operational freedom and no financial discipline, then you might go berserk and it will take you to chaos. And we have a lot of examples right within our own country where a lack of financial discipline have made people belly up. But at the same time, if you're too grounded on the financial discipline and if you have no operational freedom, then you implode. So Wipro was an institution, if I may use the word. It was an institution that really allowed a lot of people to practice that. And that is what really helped me shape my own thinking, my own discipline. And on top of it being a Marwadi, Marwadis have this, innate ability of being risk averse when it comes to financial dealing. And that's why you will see very seldomly Marwadi's company going bankrupt. They don't go bankrupt because they have this ability of managing funds so well over generations that a bankruptcy is not really a real risk. So that's how I would like to put things.
Nice. Even if, basically talking about consulting, right? So you said sometime like that you reduce the number of years what it actually takes through education, right? So consulting is something that you should have, and then you can actually let people know or teach other people, right? So what do you feel could be a max qualification required for getting into consulting?
I talk about maximum qualification or minimum qualification?
You say minimum qualification.
Yeah, so minimum qualification, there is no minimum qualification, because if you look at somebody like Jack Ma, right? So Jack Ma hasn't had any such qualification to talk about, but still, because of his experience, and not years of experience, but the variety of experience that Jack Ma has or Mark Zuckerberg has, they are very good coaches and very good consultants. But in terms of maximum, I think beyond a PhD is something that you might overtax yourself. PhD is good enough. And why PhD? Because I think PhD allows you to spend a considerable amount of quality time on a very specific area, which you would otherwise never be able to do in your life. The amount of material which I chewed upon during those 5-6 years at IIM Bangalore, the books that we read, the kind of exposure that we got in areas of psychology, sociology, economics, philosophy, of course, management, that disciplined approach of looking at things both broadly and sharply is something that you would never do on your own. And as I said, then it becomes almost a habit.
Right.
Like there has been never ever a day that I remember where I have not read at least like 20-30 pages, right, before going to bed. So I'll ensure that I'll read 20 pages before I go to bed. And that discipline of reading the stuff, writing articles, putting this in my presentations, advocating wherever I get a chance is a virtuous loop. And that loop got set into motion because of the PhD program. So I think the most significant investment people should do, and often people shy away from doing it, is education. And as much as what Mark Zuckerberg said, that a good engineer is worth more than 100 average engineers, I always believe that a good institution is worth more than 100 average institutions. What a good institution does, and I advocate that very strongly, what a good institution does is that it puts you amidst people who challenge you intellectually. Nothing else that matters. It's your ecosystem, it's your peer group that brings the best out of you. So I think I've been privileged to not, being pushed to leave my city of Bangalore. So it was quite nice that I got settled in Bangalore. I did my studies in Bangalore. I could start my company in Bangalore. And Bangalore, of all the cities in India, since I have been traveling quite a while, but what I can talk about the city is that Bangalore is a very forgiving city.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's the most forgiving city that we have in the country. You can make mistakes. You can live for another day to make another set of mistakes. This city doesn't reprimand you as much as maybe Bombay or Delhi does. So I think it's a very pristine place to be and to run an organization. That's no doubt then that there are so many startups in the city of Bangalore. There's a reason for it. It's not just talent. It's a temperament of people that makes a huge difference.
Phenomenal. So, you know what, when you said that, Bangalore gives that environment of to grow, make mistakes as much as possible. But there is a couple of things probably as, sustainable to legal, aspects of it, where we need to be sure that before starting, especially consulting firms, we should make sure that that part is taken care very well, right? So how would you put light on that? But how did legal authorities?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was starting my company, I had a choice of having a proprietorship, having a private limited company, or having a partnership sort of a arrangement, or not getting registered at all, like a freelancer. But what I realized is that when I'm trying to position myself as a serious consultant and trying to rake in a very high billing rate, then the organization would like to talk to an organization. And hence getting yourself as a private limited company was a very important first move. And equally important is for you to identify a good chartered accountant who can take away the nuances of legalities, tax filing, GST, etc. And you can then just focus on what you are very good at. So what I've learned in my own career, and if I try to apply consulting skills on my own life and on my own self, life is too short to try and do a lot of things. Early in your life, if you can realize what is that you are phenomenally good at, put food where your mouth is. You have to really, really focus on that. And there are experts whom you have to trust, and you have to delegate things to them or partner it with them, and then focus back on yourself. So I think putting money on a good office, putting money on a good website, having a good chartered accountant, right? Developing very, very strong connections or relationships, very strong relationships, because consulting is all about relationships. Very, very critical. So these are the aspects that you have to ensure that. And of course, if I have to put in the pecking order, the most important thing is investing in yourself. I can have no presentation similar to the last month's presentation. It's very imperative that I have to sharpen my axe, because nobody will push me. I can still survive for a few more months or maybe a year basis my credibility or basis my legitimacy or background. But then thereafter I'll run out of fuel. And if I'm looking at the haul of about 35 years from now, that's the wrong range which I'm looking at. I want to be in this space for the next 35 years. And 35 years is a huge time, which means every day I have to sharpen the axe. And I can do that only if the rest of the things are kind of almost done in a boring fashion. You have to keep a part of your life so boring that other part of your life can be extremely exciting, and you can really devote your mental attention to that piece. So that's how you do it, keep your house in order.
That's beautiful insight, Dr. Bhavan. In fact, when you talk about networking and building relationships, right, and that's where consulting firms is a key factor with other companies like that. So, you know what, many people are looking forward to build that skill. But I would like to take your help in understanding what was the right way or right method, or what was approach that you followed to build a network and the connections like you did, right?
It's a good question. So the first thing that we need to bear in mind is the type of networks. There are two types of networks: professional network and personal network. And what I've firmly believed in is that you need to ensure that your personal network is very narrow but very deep, whereas your professional network is very shallow but very wide. And never ever try to convert your professional network into your personal network. So that's the first rule which I always follow, which means that even if I have been doing business with somebody for the last 10 years or 15 years in some cases, I've never ever attempted or never ever entertained any movement of that professional network into the personal realm. Because what happens when something becomes personal is that you lose your ability of saying no. It's very, very important that you should be able to say no if things go out of your box. That's number one. The second thing is content drives contact. Content drives contact. Many times people are, naive to perceive it the other way around. That if only I know so many people, I'll be better off. Not necessarily true. If you have, in today's time and age, if you have solid content, people will sniff you out. I'm very clear about that. If you have solid content, people will sniff you out. Because the marginal cost of developing a network has come to almost zero, thanks to social media, etc. In the olden days, I had to necessarily go to a conference, pay a hefty amount, socialize out of my skin to meet people, exchange cards, and then even then, I would not be sure if they would be giving me business or vice versa. But today's time and age, if you have a solid content, you can reach out to people whom you would otherwise never have met or your paths would have never crossed. So my advice to the listeners would be twofold. The first is have these very, very strong Chinese wall between your personal network and the professional network, and never ever try to trespass it. Okay, it will be bad for both the sides. The second thing is the development of your professional network has to be basis a solid content. Because solid content could be basis your own credibility, basis what you do, you research, your market view, your ability of developing new insights, your sharpness, your wit in terms of business models. But something unique has to be there so that people can be pulled towards you. And when they get pulled towards you, the third important insight which I would like to offer to you is that the basis of network is never ever what you get. It's always what you give. You should always be in a position to give something to your other party. Never ever expect anything in return. For example, in this communication itself, I'm here, completely available, ready, willing, and excited to give as much as I can. I do not have any inkling of where this is going to head towards. And almost since the lockdown has begun, almost every day, I do a webinar or a talk or something or the other of that nature. So the key is in the network, you should always be in a position to give something. And by this cosmic logic or by the logic of the network itself, things will come back to you. So long story short, three things: Chinese wall between personal and professional network. Number one. Number two, content drive contacts. It's never the other way around. And number three, in any network situation, always be in a position to give selflessly. Things will come back to you in the long run. That's been my learning so far.
Phenomenal, Dr. Pavan. Thanks for the insight. And so when we are at this, we are connecting, we are influencing other people. In fact, we are taking a lot of inputs also through the. But how do you update yourself? You already put an insight that you're looking forward to gain knowledge as much as possible from, especially from the books. on a regular basis, if somebody has to start from somewhere, right? How do they start updating themselves on this field of consulting?
So consulting is a knowledge. So think of, there are three elements to be a good consultant: the skill set, the tool set, and the mindset. In terms of the mindset, one of the most important mindsets that you need to have to be a good consultant is that of empathy. If you cannot empathize with your client, or if you can't empathize with your audience, they might listen to you once because of your pedigree or because of your content, but they would not come to you again and again. And they will never come to you from a position of vulnerability. If you look at the doctors whom you are most vulnerable against, in the sense that you are completely open to with your most vulnerabilities, especially in the space of psychiatry, the most expert psychiatrists are the ones who are extremely good listeners. They're not the ones who are necessarily good in terms of writing medicines, but they're good listeners. They ask very probing questions and they allow you to open up. And then once you have gone to that real pain area, then they'll nudge you out of it. So I think the same applies. Psychiatry is the highest epitome of consulting, because the knowledge differential between the patient and the psychiatrist is huge. And the psychiatrist has to listen. So I think the first mindset is that of empathy. Be empathetic with your people, with your client, with your customers, the person who has reached out to you to seek an advice. The second thing is in terms of skills. You need to have the skill of articulating yourself very well. Articulating not only in terms of your verbal articulation, but also in terms of your written articulation. Because the amount of reach that you can have, the extent of reach that you can have in your written communication can far outstrip what you can possibly reach out in your verbal communication. Because things don't disappear so easily once you write an article or a blog or any piece. And that's a very important skill that you need to develop as a consultant. Very, very important skill. And the third thing is a tool set. Because when you're engaging with your client, they need something to carry back. If I look at some of the most famous consultants like Tom Peters or Michael Porter, etc., what they have managed to do is to create a repertoire of tools and techniques which you can apply to a problem. Because when you're dealing with strategy, management, innovation, culture, these are very fuzzy topics, very nebulous topics. They are not scientific, they are social scientific. And there are social sciences, not physical sciences. And in social sciences, to get a hang of a condition or a situation, you need some sort of a matrix or a framework or a method or a tool to be able to put things in a perspective or in order. So you need to develop a repertoire of tools, develop skills of communication, and not only verbal communication, but also a lot of very good quality written communication, which unfortunately we as a society do not emphasize much on. We don't write as much as we should be, right? Except for maybe exams, right? And the mindset that you are here to serve somebody and serve somebody for long and for good. If I look at my own client base, a good 80% of my business is repeat business. 80 to 90% of business is repeat business. Very, very long engagements spanning more than decades, 1.5 decades, 20-year long engagements. People have gone from companies to companies, etc. And that is what allows me and gives me the confidence that I will be here for the next 35 to 40 years because of relationships.
In fact, that is a route which you have to build, start from scratch, right?
Invest in that.
Absolutely. And when, sometime back you were talking about sharpening the saw every single day, right? Probably we would like to learn from that. To start with, what does mentorship play that role in your life? How did it play that role in your life, and what importance of starting?
So you're talking of my mentors?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have had several people who influenced me, knowingly or unknowingly. And it's very difficult for me to identify with one mentor, because a person has mentored me often under different influences, which are not necessarily, I would qualify as a mentoring engagement. For example, if I go back to my PhD days, we had Professor Rishikesha Krishnan, and I used to admire his discipline, his ability to, very sharp ability of distilling things, articulation, and minimalism. Before that, at Wipro days, I used to have a bunch of people whom I used to admire. Even today, when I'm doing my consulting, some of my contemporaries are so amazing in what they're trying to do. So I think being a constant learner and being humble enough to understand that there is so much more ground that you need to cover and there's so much more that you need to learn from some of these people is a very important trait for you to have. Because in any space, what you need to understand is that in any space, there are people who are better than you. The worst that you can possibly do is to shut yourself down from them. I'm not saying go out and collaborate with them because it may not always be feasible. But at the same time, wherever you can learn from them, learn. So to your previous question, when you asked that how do I sharp the X on a regular basis, one is of course voraciously reading. Second is wherever I go, I try to observe things. Talk to people, observe things, listen to people. And I have sort of ensured that there is nobody who is immune of teaching me. Anyone can teach me, and more importantly, I can learn from anybody and in any context. So I think if you have cultivated this humility of being a sponge where you can learn, and more importantly, where you can teach, because this is how you learn. Some of the most complex concepts and some of the most enduring concepts which I have learned are by the virtue of teaching. Because teaching and writing helps you think clearly. When I'm talking to you, I have no reference, no notes. I'm thinking through my own memory and through my own articulation. But when I'm talking to you, I'm also cleansing my own thinking. When I'm writing an article, I'm cleansing my thinking. I'm reconfiguring the loose ends together in the form of a pattern. And that is what you need to. So the virtuous loop is you have to listen, you have to read, and you have to teach. Listening, reading, and teaching is the virtuous loop that enforces the learnings in you. That's what I practice.
Phenomenal. In fact, what we can definitely get is we have even read so many books, right, so far. But we would like to understand from you, if somebody like me who really wants to, build myself towards learning, what are the books that you recommend that you pick up those books every year, right? Which something that you would like to grab and revise, or something that you recommend those books to everyone should read who wants to start something of their own? Maybe a couple of.
So my reading list is quite heterogeneous. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, I recently reread this book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Mm-hmm. That's a book on survival in the Auschwitz concentration camp during the World War II. So Dr. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist and a physician who survived around 3 years in 4 concentration camps, and he talks about the importance of purpose. So there are a bunch of books which I reread, and these books are not necessarily on consulting skills. These books are again not necessarily on innovation or design thinking or strategy, but these books are on narratives, on stories, on perspectives. For example, there are 3 books which I'm reading almost concurrently. The one book is on IBM, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance. That's a book I read 10 years back, or maybe 15 years back, and I'm rereading it so that I get a new perspective. The second is on Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker. And the third book is on Honda, driving Honda. And I'm just trying to corroborate how the Japanese companies work vis-a-vis American companies, how strategies happen, how business turnaround happen. And I'm now trying to distill the insights from these 3 books and then trying to apply that to my own reading and teaching. So I think in terms of recommendation of books, my only recommendation would be heterogeneity. I'm not a very good reader of fiction. I typically read non-fiction, but in non-fiction, the range is very huge. It can go all the way from psychiatry to neurophysics to actual physics, mathematics, business, of course, design thinking, creativity, culture, society. It can even be the functioning of brain. So I try to keep a history, of course, geography. I try to keep a huge repository and repertoire of reading stuff. The thing is to read. It's very critical to read and not read the same thing over and over again, because when you read a variety of things, you're able to bring that richness into your discussion, which your users might benefit tremendously from. So that's my recommendation on the reading piece. And I read physical books, most importantly. I don't read on Kindle. I don't read ebooks. I always buy physical copy and I read it, make underlines, write on the margins, make a mind map, and it really reinforces a lot of insights. So that's how is my reading habit.
Fantastic. In fact, some time back, my friend was itself, thinking, and he was talking about, should I buy Kindle and a hard copy? In fact, you answered it so well, right? Thank you so much. In fact, I'm very curious to know, if I have to ask you, how many books do you read in a month?
Generally, I read a book in a week.
Oh wow, that means 4 to 5 books in a month.
Yeah, 4. Yeah, roughly.
Wow. And reading is definitely an investment. We have to feel that it's definitely a time investment that we need to do, right? So how do you manage within those 24 hours that you have? So in fact, my next question was definitely to understand, how do you discipline and what are the major activities that you design your 24 hours?
So in the pecking order, the most important thing is family. And family was the biggest motivation for me to start on my own. Because I had to give time to my daughter. Okay. I had to give time to my wife, to my own health, to my own career objectives. And I realized that the priorities have to be minimum and clear. My priority was family, self-development, and to be able to lead a comfortable life in the city of Bangalore. And I realized that my business can give me all these 3 and more. So that was a very critical thing. And by doing so, I have been able to cut down a tremendous amount of non-value adding activity. Tremendous amount. Because now I have so much time available with me to be able to spend time with the family, to be able to read what I wish to read, to be able to write. And at the same time, once I made a threshold that I need to earn so much lakh a month, or in the lockdown period, maybe a lakh a month or whatever it is. Once I reach that threshold, I don't overexert myself. I don't kill myself beyond that. The threshold is very critical. So this is the threshold which I need to reach every month. Once I reach that, then the remaining time is all for me. My physical fitness, for my family time, for whatever I choose to do. I don't want to kill myself beyond that. So the greed should not set in, because in entrepreneurship, you might be worse off being an entrepreneur than an employee. Because when you're an employee, you had at least some sanity in terms of number of hours of working, some family time, compulsory leaves, vacations, someone whom you can delegate the work to, somebody whom you can kind of delegate upwards to, your limited worldview. But when you become an entrepreneur, unless you self-discipline yourself, you can run amok. You'll be in a worse off situation. So I think to be able to ensure that you have sort of parameters which you have defined for yourself, which you are sticking to, you would be able to have a lot of time for yourself. And some of these things should be non-negotiable in my view. Very much non-negotiable. And that's what helps enormously.
Nice. So, non-negotiable does, obviously you just mentioned health also comes, right? So how much importance is working towards health means for you?
A lot. For example, I ensure that, that's my daughter peeping in out of curiosity. So I ensure that I spend at least 1 hour daily doing exercises in the evening. And that's in the coronavirus space. But there has been hardly any day in the last as many years as I remember. Just a second. I remember in the last couple of years where I have stretched beyond 5 o'clock. I'm strictly off at 5 o'clock. No chores whatsoever beyond 5 p.m. Completely devoting time to family or whatever else it may take. Now that's a very, very crucial aspect of working. The second aspect of working, but the second aspect is the importance of ensuring that there is certain amount of reading which I do every day before I sort of move out of maybe sleep or whatever else it takes. And the third is a threshold value. Once you meet a threshold value, you have to realize that there is no amount of attention that is taken away from you in terms of chasing business. Because I can continue to chase any amount of business, but I need to know that beyond this, I'll not chase any business at all. So 5 p.m. is a cutoff time. No more than one travel per week. At least one book to be finished in a week. Or not chasing beyond a certain threshold in terms of money have been the discipline that have really helped me tremendously. And I want to persist on these disciplines. Because right now in coronavirus lockdown, it is very easy to get frustrated and chase business. Correct? But then you would not be able to do justice and you'll burn yourself up. I think being disciplined is the key here.
Fantastic. Nice. So, in fact, this is a very question which you may, answer it very well. Do you have a spiritual side that you believe on?
Yes.
You want me to pause the video or that's fine?
Yeah, if you can pause the video.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, so there is a spiritual side. I would not want to delve into that because it is quite a private side, but yes, the answer is yes, there is a spiritual side. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thanks.
That keeps me sane.
Nice. So in fact, when you were talking about the motivation of doing something big, has been your family, right? So how much home environments matters for running a business of your own?
Very much. Absolutely, very much. Because I strongly believe that unless and until your home is at peace, you will be very vulnerable in your professional life. Very, very vulnerable. I've seen a lot of people who might be lions in their professional world, but when it comes to home, they are so miserable. I think if you can give priority to your home and sort some of the things back at home, then I don't see any reason why you should be in a vulnerable position. So that is very, very crucial. The home aspect is very crucial.
Nice. So,
yes.
So in which ways does your family support you?
When I was doing my PhD,
right?
I think PhD was a very crucial phase because I was not making money. Imagine 5 years, there was hardly any money in the family. I was working in the industry and then I quit my job and came into this sort of a very frugal living. So, and in that interim, I became a father. And that was a very testing period for me and for my family. Even when I am pursuing my career and if I have to travel sometimes, then my wife backs me up tremendously. So ensuring that your personal life is in order I think is a very, very crucial aspect to be professionally successful. So they are very, very, otherwise every day will be stressful for you beyond imagination.
Absolutely. In fact, what I have seen is, passion is one thing, but a responsibility is something that you definitely can't take your face off. Right?
Absolutely.
In fact, coming to this may be something that probably can help us with. There are so many challenges in a path of entrepreneur, but what are the top 3 challenges that you faced so far, and how did you overcame those?
In my consulting career?
Yeah, consulting career.
Yeah. So one of the challenges which I faced was the importance of saying no. I had to say no to a lot of people who wanted to work with me because I did not want to grow a very big organization. That's something I'm very, very clear about. I don't want to have a 100 people team in my company. That's not the way I look at it. It will always remain a very niche, very small company. And if somewhere along the way I find people who are, really superb, whom I can learn from, I can partner with, we will grow organically. So I had to say a lot of people no, that you can't work with me, you can't join me, etc. Similarly with organizations also. There have been a couple of instances when I had to decline a few engagements, decline few recurring engagements because many companies wanted me to do calendar program, like a lot of same program, a lot of number of times in a year. And that's something I had to say no, because for me, it's very difficult for me to repeat the same program over and over again with the same organization, because for me, the learning is zero in that process, or at least very small learning. So I always look for variety. So I had to say no to business. So saying no was a difficult thing. In terms of getting money, getting contacts, it has not been so difficult, honestly speaking. I have been able to get a lot of business, thankfully. Been able to get money also. So the usual struggles of the enterprise in terms of getting clients and getting revenues hasn't been a challenge as such.
Oh, nice. That's wonderful. In fact, when we are talking about the couple of years, the initial ages, the initial times of when you start your company, that's where you face a couple of challenges. But I think that's a matter of fact that you should be ready with, right?
Absolutely.
Nice.
You signed up for that.
Absolutely correct. So you know what? In fact, what message that you would like to share with the people who wants to start something in consulting field? What do you think that the first thing, or what message that you feel that they should be ready with?
Mm-hmm. So consulting as a career is going to be one career which will be very immune to AI. That's one thing. I'll not see a robot replacing me in the next 30 years also.
Right.
A lot of careers would go down this alley of artificial intelligence, but not consulting career. Because in consulting, and the reason it will be immune is because of the fact that you bring to table skills and temperaments which artificial intelligence will find it very, very difficult to replace. First of them would be empathy and emotional intelligence, to be able to understand your client's needs. Second is the importance of having enduring relationships. I draw a lot of inspiration from the work of McKinsey. And McKinsey has had relationships which span multiple decades. For example, their work with BBC or Citibank or some of these enterprises has been so enduring. GE, for example, has been so enduring that it has spans multiple decades, multiple CEOs, multiple tenures. And that's the kind of ability which I want. So if at all, like in the coronavirus lockdown, there have been a lot of webinars, workshops, which I'm doing complimentary for my clients. It's not that I'm not under severity of financial pressure. I'm under tremendous financial pressure. Not tremendous, but yeah, there is some financial pressure. But that financial pressure should never, ever put a strain in our relationship with the client. Because I know this is a time, if I do something complimentary for my client, they will remember it for a long time to come. For me, the easiest to say no, I don't want to do anything. But by putting that seed in, you never know what it would manifest itself into. So look at the long haul by maintaining very solid relationships, develop emotional intelligence, and the third thing is sharpen your axe. There should be no day in your career where you are not better than yesterday. You have to be better than yesterday in at least some account, either physically, intellectually, emotionally, network-wise. And that is a feedback which applies to life in general, why only consulting, but moreover in consulting careers, because when somebody comes to you seeking advice, it means that they are already putting you at a very high pedestal. So don't let them down, because it will be too late by the time they realize that they've been let down actually. So it's very important that you don't let them down. So that's the long and short of what I want to say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Pavan. Thank you so much. In fact, that kind of insight is something that people are looking forward. Take a step forward to do something of their own. And, not only consulting, but the values that you have shared with us today, it's going to blow everybody's mind. Guys, if you're looking at this video, watching this video, you don't want to miss a single word from Dr. Pavan, because that's coming from a horse's mouth, right? And wish you all the best, and looking forward to add value to a lot of people. And thank you, Dr. Pavan, to take your time out in this times and adding value to so many people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.